Following the final disintegration of the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire, after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, an Orthodox religious leader named Scholarios tears pages from a book of laws and throws them on a fire. Scholarios had lived at the center of the Orthodox world in Constantinople, and maintained through his spies that a dangerous Hellenic paganism was underway in the Byzantine outpost of Mistra, near the ancient site of Sparta. Scholarios' suspicions proved correct. He had suspected the scholar Gemistos Plethon many years earlier of concealing a Hellenic paganism, later arguing that this was the reason Plethon had left Constantinople around 1405. Following Plethon's death around 1452, it was discovered beyond doubt that Plethon was on a mission to restore a particular Hellenic polytheism, linked to a golden chain of ancient lawgivers, philosophers, seers, and mythical figures. Today's video is sponsored by Gallo Glass Books, an independent publisher based in Palm Beach, Florida. Gallo Glass Books has published a beautiful edition of Thomas Taylor's Translations of the Neoplatonists, and has just released their new hardcover edition for Francis Yates, Giordano Bruno, and the Hermetic tradition. This work is a must-read for anyone interested in Western esotericism and how the Hermetic writings influenced the Italian Renaissance. Get your copy of this excellent edition in the link in the description. The flames licked the pages of Plethon's Book of Laws, while Scholarios added more to the fire, preserving only what portions of the work were necessary to prove his case against the deceased Plethon. Indeed, Scholarios would have wished Plethon had met his end by fire and other pains, but such fantasies were too late. Scholarios' persecutive motivations and Plethon's decades-long subtlety both demonstrate the dangers of being too public and too forward about one's beliefs in the Hellenic gods at this time. In fact, for many years, Scholarios had been mounting a case against a different pagan named Juvenal, who was not altogether shy about his Hellenism. Scholarios' spies intercepted letters between Juvenal and other pagans, and Juvenal met his death by having his right hand severed, his ears cut off, his tongue cut out, before he was drowned in the ocean. Scholarios, in all his magnanimous piety, congratulated Juvenal's executioner, and was enthusiastic about further persecutions of, quote, those impious and accursed Hellenists, or rather shameless apostates from true piety, by fire and sword, and water and every other means. For Scholarios believed Plethon had been possessed by the same demons that apparently infiltrated Emperor Julian over 1,000 years earlier. As fate would have it, however, the unburnt portion of the Book of Laws, along with other intact copies of Plethon's commentary on the magical oracles of Zoroaster, would survive to become fascinating pieces of evidence for Plethon's role in relaying his golden chain of Hellenic wisdom to certain Italians who became famous for their roles in the Italian Renaissance, a Renaissance that owed so much of its revival of the classical Greek texts to long-standing preservations and developments on the part of Greek-speaking Byzantine scribes and scholars who had absorbed and continued native Hellenic practices and Platonic studies through many renaissances of their own, to the point of complicating and shrugging at the alleged Dark Ages of Europe and the misconstrued Western notions of the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century. Though it is debated, some scholars have found testimony of Plethon's influence in Marsilio Ficino, the head of Cosimo Medici's Florentine Academy, who celebrated the, quote, Greek philosopher Gemistos with the cognomen Plethon, as though a second Plato. This was no slip of the tongue or meager honor at that, and Cosimo Medici, the Italian banker, politician, and first ruler of Florence during the Italian Renaissance, may have heard Plethon deliver lectures on Plato during the Council of Florence in 1439. Lectures which would have helped inspire Medici to found the Platonic Academy at a villa in Florence around 1462. James Hankins, for instance, argues that Plethon donated Greek manuscripts of Plato's works to Ficino, quote, as part of his patronage of philosophical translation. Scholars still wonder if this is the extent of the influence Plethon had, an influence which Hankins believes has been exaggerated. Nonetheless, Ficino's not entirely unprecedented notion of the Prisca Theologia, or ancient theology, was already firmly embedded in Plethon's teachings, though they certainly differed in regards to the role Egypt played in this chain, for Plethon did not credit any ancient Egyptian in his golden chain. We should note that one of Plethon's major pupils, Cardinal Bessarion, impacted the renewed focus on Platonism in the West on no uncertain terms, and in this sense brought Plethon's teachings with him, especially in the case of reviving the works of the Neoplatonist Proclus. Regardless, the members of this new Platonic Academy in Florence, which was a relatively informal school, were responsible for translating Plato's works into Latin, along with the Corpus Hermeticum, many of the Neoplatonists, and other classical texts that would circulate through the Italian Renaissance and revive Platonism and Hermeticism in a manner that still echoes across Western history. At the risk of digressing too far into the scholarly debates about Plethon's level of influence, let's return to our major focus that caused Scholarios to weep over Plethon's Book of Laws. The same Plethon who was invited to consult on the unification of the Greek and Latin churches by the Byzantine emperor at the Council of Florence, when he was really a practicing Hellenist and initiating students in the same. For our part, we have to consult Plethon's writings in translation, his unique theology, his hymns, invocations, and commentaries to discover what we may, doing our best to let his work speak on its own terms in our effort to sprinkle at least a little light on this obscured figure at the end of an empire and the early stage of the Italian Renaissance. In the first place, Plethon presents an entire rubric of Hellenic worship, replete with hymns to the gods, holy day invocations, moral practices, theological hierarchies, and laws for the institutions that he believed were conducive to eudaimonia, the common end of all humanity, which is a good spirit of happiness and a true spiritual fulfillment. However, toward this end, there has been an endless variety of perspectives and opinions, not only about the gods, but about the proper or improper behaviors of the individual. Poets and sophists are generally not the best guides for the end Plethon has in mind, for their aims, according to him, cannot always be gauged, or otherwise are too entangled with agendas of entertainment or vain persuasion. Nonetheless, he does not doubt the gods visited the poets, only that the poets have not defined their teachings well enough to be understood by most. Thus it is to a lineage of lawgivers and philosophers who Plethon attributes with the wisdom for guiding the people to eudaimonia. To this end, Plethon presents a golden chain beginning with the oldest who has come down to his age. This was none other than Zoroaster, dated by him to around 6000 BCE, quote, who revealed with the greatest brilliance to the Medes, the Persians, and to most of the ancient peoples of Asia the truth about divine things and most other great questions. Next it is Eumolpus, who established the Eleusinian mysteries among the Athenians and taught the immortality of the soul, sometime around the 13th century BCE. Then King Minos of Crete, Lycurgus of the Spartans, Iphitus, who established the Olympic Games, and Numa, the lawgiver of Rome. For the sages in his chain, he submits the Brahmins of India, the Magi of Media, the Curetes, who reasserted the existence of the Olympian gods, whose teachings were destroyed by the giants who fought against the gods. These Curetes waged war against the giants and triumphed. Among the sages, Plethon names Palaidos the diviner and, quote, Tiresias, who gave the Greeks a great deal of high knowledge and who developed with the greatest brilliancy the theory of the ascent of the soul and its endless return to the earth. And then to Chiron, the centaur and teacher of heroes. He adds then the famous 7 sages, Chilon of Sparta, Solon of Athens, Bias of Priene, Thales of Miletus, Cleobulus of Lindos, Pittacus of Mytilene, and Myson of Chennai, who have been the attributed sources of the great 147 Delphic maxims. To these Plethon adds Pythagoras and Plato, with the following philosophers: Parmenides, Timaeus, Plutarch, Plotinus, Porphyry, and Iamblichus. And for all of these in his chain, he claims, agreed on the most important questions, and he does not necessarily present his own teachings that follow as deviations from these wise men. Nonetheless, Plethon's hierarchy of gods can be considered as a unique development, not always conforming precisely to the teachings of earlier Platonists or others on his chain, but certainly informed by them. His hierarchy is distinct in that it uses the proper names of Olympian and Hellenic gods, but places them strictly outside of the ambiguity of the poets, rather positioning them as pure forms, retaining nonetheless their Olympian names. To this effect, Plethon's Zeus is no brooding bolt-slinger with a penchant for lascivious descents, but Zeus is the supreme god and king, the self-begotten, pre-eternal first principle. He is the Platonic good. For the rest of the gods are divided in respect to their divine natures, Poseidon being the eldest and most powerful of Zeus's children, no longer Zeus's brother as it had been taught in some earlier myths. Poseidon governs the next order of gods who receive their attributes from one another and receive their cause through Zeus, in whose essence each of the gods participate. Quote, among the other gods, those are higher who have the fewest superiors and who do more and greater things in the universe. Lower are those who do lesser things and who recognize more superiors. Zeus's legitimate children are immortal, whereas the illegitimate family and offspring of the Titans produce perishable beings. In this way, the Titans are not a pre-Olympian order, but rather subordinate in the universe caused by Zeus, and lesser in power. The super-celestial gods are outside of time, and in this manner they are concordant with Zeus and without any established beginning, but rather inherently existent in the action of the first principle, spread about the universe at large. The super-celestial gods cannot be ascribed any position in space or time, and so they are everywhere and every when that there can ever be. For bodies alone persist in space and time, and the super-celestial gods do not exist as bodies, but maintain and flow down influences unto bodies that are converted to their essence. Quote, the legitimate children of Zeus inhabit Olympus, the highest and most pure region of the heavens. The illegitimate race occupies Tartarus, a region inferior to the other. This distinction of Olympian and Tartarian is the major distinction between the super-celestials. These distinct families both occupy the super-celestial order, and though they are exactly unique, they form as a whole, by their various attributes, the unified order of Zeus. Quote, for while they have an individual character, yet they form a whole, as is appropriate for beings who proceed from the same principle and tend to the same end. These gods are governed by their higher and govern what is lower and in service to them, establishing, as it were, the essential paradigm reflected throughout the lesser and more particular regions of existence. The children of Poseidon and his siblings form the third order of celestial gods, who inhabit the heavens, are rational and immortal, whose bodies escape the disintegration of age. These are the stars that follow their regular orbits and move according to a refined system. In the next class of beings are the terrestrial daimons, ruled by the idea form of Hermes, who has, quote, authority over terrestrial daimons. This class is charged with executing the orders of the other gods, and immediately touch on human affairs. These daimons in Plethon's system do not have the capacity for evil. Neither are they evil in nature or in action, though the fallibility of the humans who interact with them may not possess the capacity to act in perfect accord with daimons, and may themselves commit evils due to their fallibility. The daimons are the nearest divinities to the human species, and as such they may more readily interact with humans on behalf of and in service to the gods. The soul of both daimons and humans are of a fiery nature, made by Poseidon to be as vehicles. For Plethon, however much he criticizes certain charlatans for professing miracles and other actions, it was nonetheless possible for souls to receive visions of their past lives, foreknowledge of the future, and to receive visions in dreams, these visions coming to us from the daimons. As well, Plethon maintains the ancient place of the heroes in the terrestrial hierarchy, being still, as they always were, of a nature surpassing the common human soul, and being great sources of the benefits received by the gods. For the gods, by means of Poseidon and always through the extension of the first cause, have placed the souls in the all. And, quote, since we make mistakes because of this position in each instance, you have assigned a correction and actions to raise us up and bring us close to divinity. Indeed, Plethon develops upon the common morals and virtues, presenting in accord with his select philosophers the contemplative target of the soul. For the soul always has within herself the capacity to raise her gaze upward, to fix one's thoughts and actions in the sphere of the good, and by so doing to be disentangled from the cycle of previous errors. For the gods maintain through their daimonic agents always the means and the powers for souls to correct, to repent from falsities, through worthy thoughts and behaviors. Quote, and may you send us dreams from the gods, for the sake of meetings with us, guiding our souls and raising us out of evils without suffering. But when, yielding to the association with our mortal part, we move away from you, when we depart from you and don't think what we should, we fall, as a result of this abandonment, into faults, into error, and into a state both wicked and worthless. You then raise us up and straighten us, either immediately by the inspiration of better thinking, or by imposing various judgments of our bad dispositions, prevent us from yielding at once to the wisdom that inspires us. When we are punished by our misdeeds, it is not so that we may suffer, but learn through this negative state what to do as a corrective. It is not enough to admit where we have done wrong, but to progress from previous behaviors that brought upon the need for correction. Plethon took a practical approach to the individualistic variety of the soul's navigation through life. Not every human will have at the pinnacle of their will the same governing principle best suited to their nature. He understood that different individuals in the same circumstances will come away with entirely unique experiences. Thus, it is not that fate governs all things like a piece of clockwork to be wound up and released, but within the mechanics of the human soul, a freedom is maintained. At the level of Zeus, of course, all possibilities are not only implied, but known. But at the level of the human, we can navigate the fine particularities of the all, within the limits of our world. And regarding our world, Plethon has it being fashioned by Poseidon. It was originally a system full of perfected beings of a great variety. But as soon as Plethon begins to explain this early phase of the world, Book 2 is cut short due to the burnings of Scholarios. Nonetheless, Poseidon is a great example of the kind of gods Plethon understood. Poseidon is not only a form, but comprehends in himself all of the individual forms. He is the male principle who gives beings their peculiar characteristics, and Hera, who is all of matter, contains in herself the image of all images of Poseidon, containing the potential of every form it is possible for matter to reflect. Plethon compares the material reflections to the reproduction of images brought about by the use of several mirrors. where we are able, through trivial matter, to play with this higher idea of infinite degrees of the same image being reproduced immediately into an infinite continuum. This infinite continuity of the mirror images is not completely experienced by the incarnate soul, but can be used as a framework to conceptualize the potentiality of the plane of pure forms. However, given that the all is inextricably enveloped by the one, the soul may find an abundance of analogous microcosmic examples that hint to a grander design, stretching all the way back to the first principle. Quote, "There is an analogy and a relationship between things on earth and those above, and from things up there to those here below." One example can be found in the work of artists engaged in the creative act. When the human soul participates in creativity, she is engaging with the same essence of divine creativity involved in ordering the cosmos, and it is the god Pletho who holds in entirety all the forms that human artists engage with, much as Hera holds the mathematical forms in matter that mathematicians engage with. Male and female are also higher forms of active and passive principles manifested in two material bodies. Plethon writes of many laws and punishments for certain crimes, which for our part are not of interest, as we are focused more on his theological and philosophical material. When he comes finally to his explanations for naming forms and ideas, after the classical Hellenic gods, he presents his names as a kind of recovery from the poet's complication of the names, but seeks to restore the names of the ancestral gods in a way that also advances their underlying principles and perhaps modernizes the gods according to contemporary science and wisdom. Unfortunately, as soon as he begins to explain his reasoning, we're confronted with another destroyed chapter. For Plethon did not just make one enemy in Scholarios, but he also made another in one Christian philosopher, George Trebizond, who despised Plato, prayed for God to repress the Platonists rising in Italy, and fancied himself an apocalyptic prophet. Trebizond would later get himself into serious trouble for his vehement attacks and misrepresentations of classical authors. He apparently encountered Plethon in Florence, and as Trebizond retells it, quote, "I myself heard him at Florence asserting that in a few more years the whole world would accept one and the same religion, with one mind, one intelligence, and one teaching. And when I asked him, Christ's or Muhammad's, he said, neither, but it will not differ much from paganism. I was so shocked by these words that I hated him ever after and feared him like a poisonous viper, and I could no longer bear to see or hear him. I heard too from a number of Greeks who escaped here from the Peloponnese that he openly said before he died that not many years after his death, Muhammad and Christ would collapse, and the true truth would shine through every region of the globe." If Plethon believed this, his Book of Laws, in its completion, may have been the guiding light to a restored Hellenic religion, indeed a restored Hellenic civilization, which he also advocated for. For the Orthodox world had not simply severed the Greeks from all their various practices, rituals, and beliefs that had colored the classic Hellenic world. More so, the Byzantine world absorbed these practices into their versions of Christianity, painting a history of a timeless folk tradition from ancient Greece, and not merely a folk tradition that had been lost or unkept. Plethon has been considered to be mad by some, at the very least bold in his personal dreams for the future of a world increasingly stitched in by the Ottoman Turks. It is implied that Plethon believed the movement too far away from the Hellenic religion was part of the reason for the disintegration of the empire. His efforts for restoration were also influenced by the humanism and rationalism of his time, and he was not so dense as to fail to recognize what advancements had been made in science and in understanding. Where we might find examples of Hellenism being adopted or at least entertained in the following decades after Plethon's death, there is another important commentary that, just like Emperor Julian had planned to use in his efforts to restore Hellenism to the Roman Empire in the 4th century, was important for Plethon's hopes for restoration. As we found in Plethon's Golden Chain, the anciently dated Zoroaster, we must visit Plethon's other vital surviving work, his commentary on the Chaldean oracles, which many Neoplatonists before him treated as ancient and sacred text. Plethon himself related these oracles to the Magi and followers of the Persian Zoroaster. Nonetheless, these oracles are no longer regarded as ancient, nor are they viewed as coming from any Babylonian or Persian Magi. They are dated around the 2nd century and usually attributed to Julian the Theurgist and his father Julian the Chaldean. Although we should not discard these oracles as non-oracular or devalue them due to their more recent dates or their scattering across the various sources they are extracted from, but should hold them in the context with their long-standing Neoplatonist commentators, and understand the profound impact they had on Platonists and other philosophers, from Numenius in the 2nd century and all the way down past Plethon. In this sense, these oracles were divinely inspired, having as their source the gods who spoke through Julian in his theurgical rites. But Plethon tells us in more detail why they are so important. Quote, "They're from Zoroaster and his disciples. It is to him the most ancient of those in our memory, to whom we attribute them, not supposing, however, that he discovered them, for these true doctrines are co-eternal with the whole heaven, and indeed among people. If they gather sometimes more, sometimes fewer by their strength, at least they always have those of us who behave according to the common ideas that the gods have put in our souls." To Plethon's credit, and those earlier Byzantine preservers, the oracles through his commentary were introduced into Western Europe, as they were translated into Latin by the 1460s and studied by the same Italians who Plethon influenced. The oracles were later translated into English in the 1660s. In Thomas Stanley's English, the first oracle Plethon uses reads, "Seek thou the way of the soul, whence or by what order, having served the body to the same order from which thou didst flow, thou mayest rise up again, joining action to sacred speech." Plethon explains that the Magi believed in the human soul's descent, operating for a time as an embodied mortal, where at expiration the soul must return from whence she flowed. If the soul performs well in her worldly office, she will return to that holy bright mansion, quote, "according to the things which she has done in life." By sacred speech, it means that which concerns divine worship, by act, divine rites. The oracle therefore says that to this exaltation of the soul, both speech concerning divine worship and religious rites are requisite. This commentary appears to be the closest to a theurgical comment. As far as it is known, Plethon did not write about theurgy. If he taught or practiced theurgical rites as described by Iamblichus, we will never know. Iamblichus's place as the final link in Plethon's chain, however, points to Plethon's awareness of such theurgy. This chain also contains earlier seers, initiates, and men in touch with the gods. Plethon's comments in the Book of Laws about divine rights affirm the human's immediate proximity to terrestrial intelligences serving gods unbound by space or time who also participate in the human being's ascension. Quote, "For these rights are a means of molding and impressing our imagination, the faculty closest to the divine part of our being, to bring it up to what is noble and divine, and at the same time to make it more submissive and obedient to our most divine part." The Chaldean oracles were judged as inspired for more than 1,000 years by the time Plethon made his comments. Proclus, the most labyrinthine Neoplatonist, famously framed the oracles and Plato's Timaeus as texts to preserve if all others burned. Michael Psellus, the Byzantine savant and historian in the 11th century, also studied and collected the oracles attributed to Zoroaster. But as we've seen, oracles aren't cherished because of their human channels alone, but the message brought through them by the gods. Brought down into a sphere subject to the planetary fate, the seven spheres. Thus, the second oracle's value is self-explanatory. Quote, "Stoop not down, for a precipice lies below the earth, drawing through the ladder which hath 7 steps, beneath which is the throne of necessity." To stoop down wholly toward the material body is to descend into wickedness and misery, becoming a slave to the continual fulfillment of desires, further entangled in the sphere of fate below the planets. In his Book of Laws, Plethon once again regards dreams as a means to be in the company of divine beings and retain our proper orientation. Quote, "Inspire us kindly while we sleep, guide our soul in a dream to your company, and awaken us whole and free of evil, willing to walk in this straight way that will lead us to the good and to all that pleases you." And further in the oracles we read, "It behooves thee to hasten to the light and to the beams of the Father, from whence there was sent to thee a soul endued with much mind. Let the immortal depth of the soul be predominant, but all thy eyes extend quite upward." With these two oracles, it is further instructed of us to allow what is divine in us to rule. As Plethon put it in the Book of Laws, we operate in this middle place, halfway fixed to the world in a finite lifetime, but halfway in the stars, which is the symbolic home of our immortality. To allow that lower and desirous aspect brought on by the association with the body to rule us too strongly, we fall short of the divine aim, and can descend further into the confusion until we invite more drastic means for correction through the strangling of the Furies, who even through inciting fear seek our rise toward virtue. But this is not to say to neglect the body at all. Quote, "Leave not the dross of matter on a precipice." This dross of matter is the body, which Plethon knows we must not leave untended. Quote, "But take care of it whilst it is in this life, to preserve it in health as much as possible, and that it may be pure, and in all things else correspond with the soul." So much for our selection of the oracles and Plethon's commentary. In what survives of Plethon's conclusion in his Book of Laws, Plethon says that although there are no atheists known in the world, many people nonetheless have variants of opinion about divinity. Some are further and some closer to the truth. Quote, "For us, we remain attached to the doctrine that we know best, that of Zoroaster, professed also by Pythagoras and Plato. It exceeds all other doctrines in accuracy, and moreover, it is our heritage." Some sophists, however, promise great immortality and gain popularity from the crowd. Quote, "Whereas according to our doctrine, our souls will not cease, whenever their turn has come, to have again some share of mortality." This is because in Plethon's understanding, reincarnation was natural to the soul's voyages, and the possibility remained for having yet another mortal life. Quote, "But first of all, it is wise in general not to prefer those who promise the most, but rather those who deserve the most confidence, and likewise, one should not prefer the doctrines that spread overly great hopes to those more worthy of trust." On the whole, Plethon's influence and high regard can be seen through Emperor John VIII's willingness to consult him on the attempt at unifying the Orthodox and Catholic churches. Plethon represents one of the more profound philosophers at the end of the late Byzantine era, whose presence and speeches at the Council of Florence, writings and students in Mistra, rehabilitated the conversation around Hellenic polytheism and Platonism for its next rebirth in the Italian Renaissance. In fact, Plethon advocated to Emperor Manuel II for recreating Hellenic civilization based in large part on Plato's Republic. But these dreams, like those civilizational dreams of Plotinus before him, never gained the momentum he wished. In conclusion, I leave you with Plethon's 13th monthly hymn, To All the Gods, as translated by John Opsopaus. O Zeus, supreme, who art the greatest of all gods, the eldest demiurge, and the All-Father too, and all you other gods who are Olympians, or are Tartarians, or Celestials, or of the earth, if we commit some bad mistake or reckless deed, allow us, purified, to near your blameless state, and let our lives be blessed, especially you, O Zeus, who art above all, the most powerful of all, who art together both the first and final good. Thank you for headbutting the like button and subscribing like the generous soul that you are. If you would like to support the channel and help us sprinkle more light to heal and reorient the Western mind as hyper-rationalism and materialism spin out into their inevitably chaotic and glorious deaths, find the links below. Be well. Thank you.